irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to Remotely Unique with Mary Baca, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Mary Baca broadcasting to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hope you all are having a fantastic day. First of all, I just want to say that I have been in my field of practice of psychology for over 30 years. And in that time, I've been fortunate enough to really do a lot of things. I do have to say that I enjoy being in my field of practice very much. And in that time, I've maintained a private practice now for 26 years. And in addition to that, up until about 10 or 15 years ago, I always worked part-time for other people. So I've done child abuse investigations. I've taught criminology and psychology classes in local universities here in Albuquerque, and done trainings and seminars that I do still here in Albuquerque, and even remotely through webinars and things like that. Hence the name Remotely Unique for the show. But today we are going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is trauma. And it is definitely an area, you can ask anybody that knows me, it's an area that I am passionate about talking about, because I feel that trauma is at the root of everything that's going on around us, everything that we experience. A lot of times in life, like drug and alcohol addiction, at the base of that is traumatic experiences for the person that's going through that. In fact, when you take just the definition of trauma, on a mental level, trauma is any emergency that evokes an emotional reaction. So when you think of that definition, so many things go into that category. And in fact, it differs from one person to another. What you might find a traumatic experience, another person might not, and so on and so forth. And that is one thing that makes it kind of an interesting topic, but one that I think deserves a lot of attention. So today I have as guests, I have first responders, and I'll introduce them here in a little bit. One of the things about trauma, it occurs when there is even a sudden anticipation of severe injury, either bodily or mental injury. Whether or not that injury occurs, just anticipating it can result with a trauma for the person. And, first responders, they face trauma all the time, day in, day out. That is the nature of their job. So the topic that we're going to talk about and the segments that have come before it definitely impact them on and off the job. And I felt like it would just be really helpful for you to hear from them. So we're going to talk to them today. And some of you might wonder, why I've dedicated I'm dedicating my first 4 segments of the radio show to first responders, and that is because I don't want you to forget it. They perform duties and functions that are so critical to all of us. They are the ones that will answer a call at 2 a.m. and go to our rescue, go do CPR on a loved one or go to a motor vehicle accident. They're always there for us. And so to me, when I started this radio program, it was a no-brainer to me to try to give back, to these people who sacrifice so much for us. I've been working with first responders for over 15 years through contracts that I have and just referral from other resources in the community. And so I've gotten to see what the backlash of the trauma that they experience has been, and the toll that it takes on them professionally and more so personally. So when I have somebody come in and they're going through, some kind of addiction, whether it's drug or alcohol or moodiness or violence or things like that, And those all link back to the trauma, which a lot of times people don't link those things back to the trauma that they experience in their career. And oftentimes I'm able to see the light bulb go on when I help them connect the dots, so to speak. So that's always interesting. Trauma, it's a basic cycle. It is a cycle that involves shock, denial, anger, blame, grief, fear, and even acceptance and resolution. And the key is, whether you're a first responder or not, whether you're just somebody listening into this program who's had experience with trauma, the key is figuring out where you're at in that cycle. But to admit to yourself that everybody goes through that cycle when they've experienced something that's traumatizing. And the thing that often happens for people is they actually get frozen at some point in that cycle. And that's when, there's a problem. So it's not always the person that's having the flashbacks or, physical feelings of anxiety because of a traumatic experience. I mean, sometimes it's anger. A lot of times it's not uncommon that I have people who come in who are very angry and moody and snappy. And, a lot of times that's connected back to the trauma. One of the things with trauma, or really any kind of emotions, is if you don't allow yourself to have them, they will leak out in some way. They will force themselves out in some way. So that might be through infidelity, that might be through violence or excessive discipline with the kids. That might lead to just you, the individual, feeling sad and hopeless and not knowing why you feel that way. So I think that's one thing I really want everybody to hear and take note of, is that feelings really are not an option. The option is how you're going to do that. Are you going to wait until something forces its way through that brings your attention to the fact that you're in distress? Or, hopefully take preventative measures and take care of it on the front end of things. So, and we'll talk at the end of the show about maybe some ways you can deal with trauma and even stress. Acute stress is something that the first responders you hear from today, they all have experienced that. And unfortunately, so many of us in today's society and just in life, we experience acute stress. So I'm going to go ahead and start with introducing my guest speakers today. We have, they are all from local law enforcement and fire service agencies. Whether they're retired or active duty, they have all dedicated over 20 years of their life individually to their field of service. So I want to just first off just express that I'm truly appreciative for you all being out there and the sacrifice that you pay, personally, because there is sacrifice to be made, whether it's that your families end up having to do without you for the holidays and things like that. So I want to welcome Loriana Sargent, who has 20 years in fire service, and Rich Garcia, who is a retired police officer. And Rich, how many years were you on the force?
23 years.
23 years. And Ronnie Martinez, who also was in fire service. And how many years were you in fire service, Ronnie?
I did 20 years as a career firefighter, and then I did about 10 years as a volunteer.
Okay, great. So when you guys think of originally back to when you first started your careers, and I know that's taken you back quite a ways, and even at any point during your career, did you feel mentally and emotionally prepared for the trauma that you experienced on the job? And
well,
any of you can answer.
Okay, for me, you know what? No, I wasn't. When I started volunteering, in one of the busiest stations in the South Valley here in Albuquerque. No, I wasn't trained on how to handle the emotions or the trauma that we were getting ready to be subjected to. So there was no training. Nobody told us how to deal with it. There was no help back in the day. So we basically learned it on how to deal with it. Basically, I guess the wrong way after we had calls.
Like, what were some of the ways that you're referring to as the wrong ways?
One of the ways was I was told that think of it as not being a family member. It's somebody that you don't know. Think of it as as a piece of meat, like a piece of steak, I guess, per se, and don't get involved, don't get attached to it, is what they were saying. And then they told us that if we got attached to it, it could affect us later. And that's one of the ways they told us how to deal with it.
Wow, and you heard that early on in your career, it sounds like.
Yes, I did. Yeah, like I said, I was probably about 15, 16 years old when I started volunteering. I was subjected to trauma very early in my career.
And that's one of the things I want to say, whether you're the program that I have here in Albuquerque that's called Behind the Badge, where badges unite. It's intentionally named that because trauma doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're a volunteer firefighter or if you're a paid employee. It doesn't discriminate in terms of how it's going to affect you. So that's a long time to be in the fire service for sure.
Oh, it definitely is.
What about you, Loriana?
I can say that I wasn't emotionally or mentally prepared for what we see on the job. I don't think anybody is, and the only skills that we have to cope with those things are the things I think that we were taught by our parents or what we picked up along the way from our peers. But there wasn't any set time where to be set aside to teach somebody how to cope with these things or what you can do to work through the trauma.
So how did you deal with that in itself?
I think a lot of it depends on the call, and for the most part, especially in the fire service, I believe that so many of us, after a call, we come back to the station and you sit down and you talk about it, or whoever else was on the call, you talk about what went on the call, and every once in a while somebody will dabble into how they felt about it. And that is kind of the extent of how we deal with it.
Right. Well, and that's something I think that's different for police officers, Rich, wouldn't you say, is you don't go back to the station and have that opportunity to vent with other officers.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show. Dealing with the emotions, I have the unique situation of being in the fire department and also a police officer. I started when I was very young in the fire department. I grew up very quickly. The adults around me will respond to an accident scene, whether it was a fatal accident or just a minor accident, and they would treat each accident as if it was an ordinary day, no trauma involved. So I grew up with the same reaction, whether I went to a house fire or a car crash or domestic violence. My reaction was normal because that's the way I was grown or taught to. Don't overreact, remain calm, and don't show any emotions. And that I carried on through my entire fire department career and my law enforcement career.
Right. That makes me think of, I've met with several cadets that are just starting out their career, or, they're out of the academy, but, and it's almost like, it's been interesting to see people who are newly traumatized, so to speak, and then see the toll that it takes and have that kind of confusion because the message they get from their peers is that's not supposed to bother you, everything's fine, and yet their reaction is no, everything's not fine. Did I even choose the right career to be in? I don't know if you guys ever have felt like that, for different reasons, but I know I've had people tell me that because the message they get is, no, you're not supposed to be bothered by this, and if you're bothered by it, you're not cut out to do it, kind of thing. So I don't know if you can relate to that, but it kind of sounds like what you were saying of, being given that message very early on in your career as well, Rich.
Absolutely. Like I said, I was always taught this is normal, don't overreact. I was 16, 17 years old when I first gave CPR to a 90-year-old lady. Her ribs cracked, they crumbled. I was like shocked, but the adults around me continued to do their job and perform CPR, and I continued to do my job. And as we went back to the fire station, we just went about our normal duties. Like, we didn't talk about it. How did that impact me? We didn't discuss any of that. There was no support groups. There was no resources. We went back to the station or back to school, and we went about our day.
Wow. How was, when you then, like you said, you have a unique experience in that you were a firefighter and a police officer. So in terms of like handling trauma and even with your peers, how would you say the two cultures, are similar or different?
Absolutely, Mary. I grew up very quickly around the fire station. That taught me to be a better person in the law enforcement career and how to respond to car crashes, how to assess situations and deal with whether they're mentally disabled or physically challenged or emotionally challenged. There's different people out there, and the fire department taught me different scenarios and how to deal with these people, which actually helped my law enforcement career.
Right. But I think one time you and I were having a conversation and I was like, wow, I never really thought about it like that with, like Loriana shared with fire service, they go back to the station and they vent to each other and they, joke or whatever goes on, they deal with it. With police officers, you don't have that same opportunity to do that, correct?
Absolutely, Mary, you don't. You go back to your police car, you sit in your car, type out your report, and there's usually about 15 calls holding. So once you finish your report, or you don't even get a chance to finish your report, once you're done with that call, you move on to the next call. And then when you're done with that call, you continue on to the end of your shift. And hopefully you get all your reports turned in. That's the priority, is make sure that your reports are completed, and before you leave, that way you don't get disciplined by your supervisor later on for not completing reports. Right.
That would make it really difficult right there in itself, because you don't have that opportunity to vent with peers like firefighters do. That would definitely be difficult. So going back to you guys even thinking about, I want you to talk a little bit about how you have experienced trauma on the job or dealt with it, like without going necessarily into the nature of the call with too much graphic detail, but more so focused on, how have you coped with whether it's smells that have stuck in your mind or whether it's images that have stuck in your mind or whether you just weren't able to sleep that night or, things like that. How have you guys coped with those things during your 20 years plus?
For me, there's a certain flower, and I always forget the name of it. But to me, when I smell that flower, it reminds me of death, and that's the way I describe it. Because it's everything that I've seen. I mean, it's very difficult. So, you try to deal with it. And the best way you can. For me, I would go home and I would sit on the couch. The TV wasn't on, but I'd be staring at the TV. Be very quiet. I never reverted to alcohol or any type of drug or anything like that, or abuse. I would just go and try to be by myself. Would never talk about anything, and that's how I try to deal with it. If I had coworkers that were, if we had some type of call that was traumatic, typically I went to my partners and I asked them, are you guys okay with this call? Let's talk about it. Do I need to call a CISD team? And try to get them some help. And in the past, I have referred several of my coworkers in the past, to come and talk to you, reference to some of the trauma that we've all encountered over the years. But yeah, there's several different types of different smells. I could, like today, I can't smell alcohol for some reason. I can't smell it. But I can remember different positions that the patients were in. Whether their eyes were open. I was always curious when I was younger, joining the fire service. So if something happened and we seen something, I was always wanting to look at what was going on, to see why the body was laying the way it was laying. Sometimes I even asked. I would even ask the person, the patient that was deceased, can you see me? Can you hear me? Especially if their eyes were open or closed. So,
right, and you also were really young too. So I'm sure there was a lot more curiosity. Well, and maybe that's even something. Maybe you guys can share too, Loriana and Rich, if that's something that's just kind of common. When you first start your career, if there's some curiosity about. Just in general,
I think, the first time you see a dead body is, it's kind of, it's the first time. So there's some curiosity to that, and you kind of want to look more and see more and just take it all in. For me, it goes back, I still remember two of the first calls early in my career. One was a SIDS baby, and one was a car accident involving, I think there was 5 victims, but 3 fatalities. And I know that I had, after both of those, especially the SIDS baby, I was not a mother yet, but I could see how it affected the guys in the station that had kids. And I think it was a big deal to be able to sit down with them after that call and talk to them about it and see how they felt. And they were very open about it and open about having a hard time because they did have kids. So in a way, roundabout way, it affected me also, just knowing that they were going through that. And the car accident, both of those calls, I know that I had trouble sleeping. There was changes in my appetite. But there are 2 calls that I have vivid pictures of still in my head. I don't feel like I'm affected by them anymore. I don't lose sleep over it anymore. It doesn't change my mood to think about it. Maybe because it was so long ago, but I still can think about it and have the vivid pictures of the scene and what was going on there at the time.
Well, that's one of the things about the mind, unfortunately, is, time is a man-made thing, so the mind can remember things as if it was just yesterday.
Yeah, that's very, very true, yeah, because I have pictures back when I was a volunteer. We had a trailer fire, which there was possibly 2 babies. There were 2 babies inside the trailer. And I remember telling the chief, let me go in and do the search and rescue, because I know they're in there because of the way the mother's reacting. And so they kept telling me no, and the other 2 individuals that came out said that they had finished their search and rescue, and that everything was okay after the fire was out. That's when I went, and that's when I looked inside one of the windows, and I could see the 2 infants laying on their bellies, and then there was a puppy that was holding on to one of the infants, and the puppy looked like, because it was a small dog, it looked like the dog was trying to pull one of the babies out, and so I can remember that, and I see that every day. So it's just like our military. I love our military. so much, and and because they have PTSD also, but we as firefighters also have PTSD, and we have flashbacks, and so sometimes I'll sleep, or if I'm sitting at the house, sometimes I'll hear a tone, and I'm retired now after 5 years, and I'll still hear a tone, or I can remember basically every call that I've had. I can remember almost every patient on things that went on and with everything. So.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot for your mind to hold onto. And, the thing with trauma, or not trauma, the thing with things that we experience them with all our senses. So as you replay things back in your mind, it's smells, tastes, things you felt physically. I mean, there's all of that our body and mind are taking in at the time.
Absolutely, Mary. I have a situation also where a Vietnam veteran who was, he had pipe bombs. He had them strapped onto his arms and strapped onto his legs, and he had a suicide note. He was going to dive his truck into the VA hospital. Well, he never made it there. The pipe bombs blew up in his lap. I was the first one on scene, 6 o'clock in the morning. The highway department found him there. When I first got there, I could smell burnt ham. This was right the day before Thanksgiving. So now anytime I smell burnt ham, it always reminds me of the scene where the Vietnam veteran had the pipe bombs. I could smell it, I could see it, I could taste it, just like it happened. This happened in the mid-1990s, and I could still picture it today as it happened yesterday.
And still the smell is real too, yeah.
Exactly, smell of the burnt ham.
Yeah, it's amazing how that stuff just sticks. And the thing is you guys are aware of those things. So many people, go through their day and the mind is getting triggered constantly with those kinds of things that you all just described. And then the reactions come. So the reaction might be a sudden change in mood. The reaction might be to suddenly get really tired, or the reaction might be to want to go and drink. Because what happens is there's a triggering that goes on subconsciously at the very least. And, we react to that trigger whether we're aware of what's going on or not. So the more it is really difficult to know yourself in terms of kind of looking at all of this stuff, but therein lies a lot of triggers that at least you can understand, that if you smell burnt ham, that's going to affect you. And if you see, certain things that's going to affect you. And to me, I think that's better than not knowing. I don't know how you guys feel, but to me, I think it's better than not knowing and just being blindsided. How would you say, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but how would you guys say you were still impacted by things that have occurred? I know you're talking about like the kind of like some of the sensory triggers that go on for you, but emotionally, how are you guys still impacted by things that have happened years ago?
You know what? The way I look at it is, I will always have that. I don't think it'll ever go away because, here I am 5 years. I've been retired 5 years now, and I still see stuff. For myself, I don't have no emotion. I don't cry. And I guess it's just, over the years of having to deal with death and different situations that you become numb. I guess I'm numb. On all the situations. So, again, like I don't have no feelings, for instance, my mother passed away about 3 years ago, and, my family was asking me if I was okay because I didn't cry, and to this day I still haven't cried. So no, but it's very hard to deal with. So hopefully one day I will be able to continue seeing you and trying to get my emotions out.
So even though you don't have emotions, what would be some of the other signs that you're in distress. Like if earlier you had mentioned that you isolate, does that still continue to be like a way of coping maybe? Like if you isolate now, you kind of know something's going on even if you can't feel it?
Yeah, definitely. If there's something that's going on, yeah, I like you said, isolate myself. I don't like to talk, I'm trying to work it out myself. So basically I'll just go, find a couch, or like my wife says, my recliner is my whoopee cushion, I guess. But because I like to sit on that, but yeah, I'll stay there and I'll be very quiet, and I don't like to talk. So yeah, that's definitely one of the situations that I do.
Right. Can you give an example of like just like how numb you are? I know, like with the accident that you shared with me. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The accident from
When you got hit.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, so last year I was hit by two vehicles, two different times. And the first time that I got hit, I rolled on top of the vehicle, and then I fell. And I was running, actually, is what happened. And I was coming to the crosswalk, and there was a stop sign, and I see this elderly couple. The elderly man was driving, the elderly lady was the passenger. And after she waved at me, so I figured, okay, they both see me. So I went running through the crosswalk, and he failed to stop, and he hit my left side. I rolled on top of the vehicle, and then I fell off, and there was other cars in the intersections. And I bounced right back up, and I dusted myself off, looking around to see if anybody's seen me. And then somebody on the other side of the intersection was asking me if I was okay. And I basically, to me, I thought they were asking me if the people that were inside the vehicle were okay. And so basically I went in and I asked both the elderly couple, are you guys okay? Is everything okay? Are you guys injured? What can I do for you? Not even thinking about myself. And so, and then the guy or the people that were on the other side of the street kept asking me, are you okay? Are you okay? And I was like, no, they're okay. They're okay inside the vehicle. They're good. And then so, once I determined that they were okay, I continued around on my run, never thinking that, I was the one that was hit. But later on, I do have some deficits on my left side that, where I have pain every once in a while, I guess you could say, so it's, so I deal with that. But yeah, I don't, today, as a matter of fact, I cut my finger, and I was working on some wood, and I cut a chunk of it off, and I didn't realize I cut it until I seen the blood on top of the joiner that I was using, and I was like, oh, I cut my finger. So, because one of the things that they teach in the fire service is don't panic, especially if you're going to go see another patient, is don't panic, because if the other people see you panic and you're the first responder, and you're going to make them panic even worse. So, they tell us, it's not your emergency. Although it was my emergency, my brain didn't, I guess, look at it that way. To me, it was, my brain looked at it as the people that were inside the vehicle was, my priority was to check them first, I guess, to make sure that they were okay.
Right. And over the years I've been asked or had conversations where it's like, well, you can't feel on the scene, right? Like you can't feel during a call for obvious reasons. Like you do need to make sure the patient is taken care of and attended to. But there has to be some time, whether it's at the end of your shift or, sometime during your days off to follow, where you kind of sit with what went on during your shift and kind of look at, did any of that affect you? But of course not. I'm not suggesting people let themselves have those intense feelings during a call. Like that would be crazy, right? But sometime after, I think it's really important. And thank you, Ron, for sharing that. Ron is kind of an extreme example of how PTSD can really play out and really have you reacting or not reacting physically, like not even really having those physical sensations that are associated with emotions. Loriana or Rich, do you have anything to add to that?
I would, Mary. I responded to thousands of critical incidents with trauma, And I definitely would have no emotions, whether there was a suicide call, whether there was a motor vehicle accident, where it was a domestic violence, a shooting. I would absolutely have no emotions. I would treat those calls as I would, a regular accident scene to a homicide. I would treat them no different and not express any emotions. So once I put on that uniform, that's who I was. That's what I represented, and that's how I grew up, is to act normal, remain calm, take control of the situation. And I believe that's the attitude, or that's how I grew up, is always take control of the situation and don't show your emotions. Be normal.
Right. Right. Was the
So-
message that you were weak? Would you guys say that, part of the message has been that if you do allow yourself to feel that that's a weakness?
I would say it depends on the person themselves. I grew up young around older adults who didn't, express that. If they did, they didn't do them around me. We didn't talk about, okay, you know what, you just saw a very violent scene, let's get you some help. That wasn't a resource back then.
Right.
You responded to, a child. I had a child that was 12 years old die in my hands. And I handled that situation, took care of that motor vehicle accident. That 12-year-old child died in my hands almost 20 years ago, and I'm still experiencing the same as it happened yesterday. So there wasn't a support group. There wasn't, resources. There wasn't a debriefing. You went about it. You took your next call, and like I said, I put on that uniform. At the end of the day, when I took it off, it didn't change me any different.
Right. And, I'm glad that they did debriefings, and I think that locally that's happening more now. But I just want to say that debriefings are not treatment. So both are absolutely necessary and helpful, for sure. One of the other things, too, that I think is important when we start looking at trauma and the impact that it has on the job is the trauma that you walk into into the service of being a first responder. So if you have like childhood trauma, and like as I just defined at the beginning of this segment, I don't know anybody that doesn't have some kind of issues with trauma just based on the definition. But so if you start your career and you already have traumatic experiences, that just is already a stack that you just add on to. And then the other thing too is if you have difficult situations that are going on in your life while you're in this career, that just really compounds an already difficult situation emotionally. So can you guys talk about both of those areas as
Absolutely.
you relate to them?
I think that,
Gloria?
I think that, like you said, everybody already has things that they have to deal with and they have to cope with in their personal lives, either prior to coming into emergency services or while they're in and already working in emergency services. And we tend to, I think what I tend to do is I put the things that happen at work, I keep putting them on a shelf. I'll deal with them later. Even stuff at home, even stuff in my personal life. You put them up on the shelf, and you're going to cope with them later, or you're going to deal with them later, or you just don't want to deal with them at all. But the fact of the matter is that shelf can only hold so many things before it starts to give. And that's where we see other things happen, other things leak out as far as in depression or addiction or issues that are going to affect our relationships and affect our jobs and affect our home life. So I think it's a hard balance, and the only for me way to take care of those things are to get help, to talk to somebody about it, whether it's professional or whether And usually I think professional help is probably the way to go for most people, but many don't want to admit it. But sometimes, you can talk it out with friends or coworkers and get through it.
Right. And,
Yeah.
the thing, too, is whatever affects you at work, I wish that once we walked through the doorway at home, like all our work stuff stayed there and vice versa. But it's not like that, right? So whatever affects you from work is going to affect your home life, and whatever is affecting you at home is going to affect your work life. What
Correct.
about you, Ron and Rich?
For me, when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old, I fell in a ditch, and so I guess that's when PTSD started. I could remember everything that happened on that day, including my nephew that fell in. I was an uncle at a very young age, and my nephew, he passed away days later. And so basically, it's like what she was saying that, you put them on a shelf. For me, I just have all these filing cabinets, and I just keep filing things away, and I tend to try to lock those cabinets so that I wouldn't have to go with it or think about it. But eventually, they do come to pass, or come to mind when either you're asleep or certain smell that might come, that you smell bring those situations back. So you got to learn to deal with all that. And it's a lot of times too, your peers, a lot of people they're afraid to talk to their peers because they're wondering, what do they think about? What are they going to think about me? They're going to probably think that I'm a coward because I want to talk about the situation or whatever. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be that you should go to the person that you trust the most and tell them, hey, you know what, I got a really difficult situation. Can me and you talk, or is there any way that you can send me for some help? Because a lot of times too, peer pressure is one of the biggest things, especially in the fire service, because you see so much stuff and you have to rely on each other. But when it comes to something that you've dealt with, some type of trauma or a dead body, or like for me, one of the biggest things was for me to deal with were kids being injured, and there's different categories that people deal with. But yeah, trying to talk to your peers is very difficult to tell them that, hey, I'm not getting sleep because of the last call we had or whatever, so your peers tend not to want to talk to you about it.
Right. That was like what I said earlier about getting pressure, peer pressure about, well, you're weak if you, if you get emotional. Rich, what about you? What would you add to those?
For me, Mary, I would add, I built a very thick wall around me. I could respond to domestic violence and be a support person for the victim. I could respond to a car crash and help those people as much as I could. And I would build that wall so I would not, take away from the scene and show my emotions. But then when I went home, that wall remained up. That wall, whether it was my girlfriend crying to me, whether it was my kids crying, I would not let my wall down. And I was told early in my law enforcement career, hey, you need to get counseling. There's something wrong with you. You're not showing any emotions. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't get upset. I would very easily be triggered and get angry. And in your past show, talking to Mike Romo, he talked about his spouse walking on eggshells. I've heard that same comment made to me hundreds of times, that every time I went home, whether it was my kids or my girlfriend or my wife, that they would be walking on eggshells. And up until the point where I was told I needed counseling, I denied it for 15 years, that I did not need counseling. There was nothing wrong with me. Well, after my first marriage, that I ended up in a divorce. So my wife now, we both went to counseling, and things have actually worked out for the better of us, because that thick wall actually came down, and I was able to show a variety of emotions. Where like Ron, he has no emotions. Me, I have a variety. I'll watch a movie, end of watch, and that I'll start crying, watching that movie. It's just a great movie. It brings out emotions in me. So those are just a few things I've experienced.
Yeah, that's great that you've gotten to that point where you can feel.
Absolutely.
That's so important. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, do any of you have anything you'd like to add? Anything you want people to hear before we get ready to close up and end the show for today?
I would like to add that, if there's any first responders, police, fire, even military, corrections, I would like to say and challenge all these individuals that, there is help out there. Please go see somebody for your trauma and your PTSD, and it's an amazing to sit down and talk, and sometimes to take things, get things off your chest. It feels good, although you'll never forget it, but it feels good to just to vent, so again, have people to please seek help with a professional, or maybe other coworkers or PTSD.
Well, I'm really glad you said that. I'm glad you said that too, because all the individuals who have been on this show and the previous shows are on my peer support team for Behind the Badge, and you actually can talk to any of them. Sometimes people don't want to talk to somebody who's in the same department as themselves, especially about such sensitive matters. They might feel like they will be given a hard time if they show that they're distressed about something. But you can be put in touch with any of these individuals that have been on the shows today and prior to. So don't forget that. All right. I wanted to let you know, too, that our podcasts are on iTunes, which is just fantastic. So you can either catch our archived shows on the website, remotely-unique.com, or you can go to iTunes under podcasts and search for Remotely Unique, and you can that way too load the show onto your phone and listen to it from there. So that's pretty exciting news. Join me next Monday, March 28th. I will be having, for the last segment for first responders, I'll be having a group of firefighter wives who will be sharing their insights and feelings about how it has felt and their experience with being married to these individuals, and how the career has affected them in their home life. So that'll be really interesting. That's actually something I'm really passionate about too, is making sure that the family members and the spouses and significant others of first responders get recognition and get paid attention to, because they go through a lot. Anything from not having you guys around all the time to having to deal with the fallout from trauma also as the spouse or significant other or child of a first responder. So I hope you'll tune in next Monday and join us for our show. It will be amazing and interesting. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me at resilience, that's RESILIENCE 2011 at yahoo.com. Thanks a lot, and you all have a great day. And thank you guys for coming on the show today. I'm sure that the information you shared will help a lot of people. Have a great afternoon and a great week.
Thank you, Mary.
You're listening to Remotely Unique with Mary Baca, only on LA Talk Radio.